What's up, Acadiana, and welcome to Offsides. I'm Shannon Wilkerson, here with Brandon Comeaux. Thanks for joining us for today's broadcast. We'll be with you until 6 o'clock on this nice Thursday afternoon.
Thank goodness it's not flooding anymore.
I know. Good Lord. Every time it rains, you have to worry about that now.
Yeah.
All right, but we're not worrying about it today. Today, we're worrying about alternative education programs, alternative education schools, and the students that go there. Now, this is something new to me, I have to say, because alternative education programs, I guess, did exist back when I was in school, but it was called special ed.
Right.
Okay. Now they actually have alternative education schools and much more specific alternative education programs. Well, the problem is that a recent report says that these troubled students rarely get the help they need through these alternative programs. And it said that the students rarely get the academic, behavior, and social help they need. So apparently these programs in the schools aren't working up to the satisfaction of our elected officials, if you will, in the public school system. Mm-hmm. So just to give you a little data, there are currently 18,000 students in the state of Louisiana that are involved in alternative education programs. There are 139 actual programs that are existing, and also 35 specific alternative education schools. Mm-hmm. Now, most of these programs are available to students that need help for less than 45 days. These are students with either behavioral problems or are learning disabled. The behavioral problems are mostly issues like fighting and vulgarity and profanity and threats, things like that. Damage to school property and acts of violence of different kinds. 88% are nonviolent. So the majority of them are nonviolent. These are just kids that can't follow the rules. Mm-hmm. Usually cell phones, tardiness, and things like that. Basically just misbehaving and can't get into the rules and regulations. Mm-hmm. So in addition to that, there are 26% of them are students with disabilities. I found that very interesting. Mm-hmm. And to compare that, 11% of the whole state school population are students with disabilities.
Right.
So go ahead.
You know, the numbers that you said, the main one that jumped out to me was 88%. And it was the one that you used for 88% of students that were using alternative service were there for nonviolent reasons. Mm-hmm. That's something that is very disappointing to me, but not surprising, because these are issues like tardiness, cell phone usage. You can also go to some other instances. We'll talk a little bit later on about marijuana usage as well, where students are just basically being sent to these alternative education programs for things that should be fixed within the school system that they're at that moment. Mm-hmm. And I'll say this, one of the biggest failures, in my opinion, that has been implemented in the school system over the past few years is this zero tolerance policy. Mm-hmm. That's been implemented in many places, where when I was growing up, it started getting implemented, where if you were involved in a fight, it did not matter whether you were the person that was defending yourself or the person that was doing it. You both got in trouble because zero tolerance for fighting, which tells people that are trying to defend themselves, if you got people that are picking on you and you're trying to defend yourselves, that tells them then you're no better than the person that's picking on you, and you're not going to have the backup of anybody else. You have to do for yourself. But when you go to do for yourself to defend yourself, then all of a sudden you're looked at as some kind of a bad child or some kind of criminal, and you're treated as such. And that's very discouraging.
Well, you mentioned criminal. Mm-hmm. Most of the time they're subject to arrest. Yeah. Okay. Most of the time in these schools, if there is a fight where actual punches are thrown, both participants are arrested. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's very different, obviously, from when I went to high school. And you're right. So sometimes I can see the support of a zero tolerance policy, but in most cases, I agree with you. Mm-hmm. I think that it's not that simple. Mm-hmm. You know, we are so subjective with so many things. Mm-hmm. You know, in today's government, right? But it doesn't seem like we are being subjective in the areas that we need to be subjective. Yeah. Okay. It's more objective. No, it's black and white. If you're in a fight, that's it. It doesn't matter if this guy ran up to you and hit you. you're not allowed to. What are you supposed to do? Just allow them to continue to hit you?
Yeah.
And let's say you didn't even throw any punches. Let's just say you wrapped him up and you're wrestling him on the ground, trying to keep him from hitting you again.
Exactly.
Him or her, because girls get in fights too. And so that's not good.
You know what this told me, Shannon? As a teenager, when this stuff started getting implemented, and it tells me the same thing now, is that discretion is not being used by the people that were giving the authority to use it.
Yeah.
To just say it in a black and white manner and not go and actually look into the situation and say, you know what? The person that's being bullied is already going through a lot of mental anguish. They're trying to come out of it, and they're trying to get the person or persons to leave them alone and give them a chance to thrive in the educational system that they're in. But to just lump them in with that same person, that shows no discretion by adults.
No, that's right. And I also don't like that many of these children with disabilities are lumped into the children, into the classroom setting with the children that are behavioral problems. And just to give you an idea, something that I found interesting about this is that let's just use MP Moss Prep School as an example.
Yeah.
All right. This is where most of the behavioral problem students go to.
Yes.
All right. The student to teacher ratio there is 8 to 1. Okay, so there's 8 students to 1 teacher in that classroom setting. Just to give you a comparison with two other schools, Lafayette High is 18 to 1. Comeaux is 22 to 1. Okay, so when I read that, the one thing that stood out to me was a lot of these problem students are getting additional attention that other students aren't.
Right.
You with me? Okay, so I agree that this is not the same type of attention. Okay, this is more aggressive attention. They are put into a smaller environment because they need to be controlled in a different way. Okay, but nevertheless, I don't like those ratios. That's me personally.
Yeah.
Especially when I find, in addition to that, all these students in the state that are in these alternative education programs, they're 5 times more likely to drop out.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about
5
that.
times more likely to drop out. 19% of them drop out versus 4% in the state average.
Yeah.
Also, black students. Black students make up 44% of the state public school population, but they make up 88% of the alternative education programs.
Yeah.
Now, in my opinion, that is because there is a big problem with single mothers in the black community. Now this is an education conversation. It's not necessarily a racial conversation, but when 88% of the students are in these programs are black, you can't ignore that as a racial issue.
Right. Yeah.
Just to give you a little background, a little bit of info. In 1960, 20% of all the black children born in the United States were born to single mothers. In 2017, 70%. Okay, so when I read that, I relate it straight to these are all children that don't have fathers.
Yeah.
Okay, when you've got basically 88% of them are black, almost 90%. Okay, and 70% of them don't have fathers. So it still comes down to the family unit.
Right.
You with me? I mean, it still comes down to the family unit. If you do not, if this is a single mother, chances are, if you're a black male, and you're being raised by a single mother, the odds are so much against you. Okay. Now that doesn't mean it's all right for them to not follow the rules. Okay, but they're the ones with the behavior problem.
Right.
And so they're the ones that end up in these alternative education programs. And then what? They're 5 times more likely to drop out.
And there's a couple of things off of that, Shannon. I'm trying to remember to get to both of them. But one of them is when you were talking about black students and the number of how high they are in this. Looking at some different school systems across the country, one unfortunate thing that I found was the punishments doled out between white students and black students were different for the same infractions, if you will. There are many times that black students were given harsher penalties for the same infractions that white students committed. Now, am I accusing anybody of doing that here in Louisiana? No. But if those stats are true and if those stats are truly bearing out, then I think people that are handing out punishments need to make sure that they look within themselves and say, hey, am I, maybe I'm not a racist, but am I looking at a student differently because of the color of their skin and not meaning to be racist, but just coming off of a kind of perception and doing
and
that.
are some black students being unfairly judged because of the behavior of others. Okay, because if let's say you're a disciplinarian,
right.
Okay, and 88% of the students that are coming in that you're having behavioral problems with happen to be black students. All right. Now, how much of them are repeat offenders and how much of them are first-time offenders?
Exactly.
Versus the smaller percentage of white students that are coming in, how many of them are repeat offenders and how many of them are first-time offenders?
Yeah, and that's a great point.
So I would be curious to know that information. You know, how many of these black students that you talked about that on the surface are being unfairly judged and receiving unfair punishment compared to the white students, but how many of them are repeat versus first time, and how many of the whites are repeat versus first time?
Exactly. And I think also the other part of what you were talking about earlier, I'm glad you brought it up, Shannon, when you talked about the home. When I was going through this report here, and I was going through and looking at other school systems across the country, not only did the fact that our school system has been failing our students, but our home system has been failing those kids as well. Because when you look at it, what they're talking about, these school systems, is they're trying to get the parents engaged. And when you talked about the single mother home system, that was a great example. But there are also home settings where kids have both of their parents there. The kids are either being neglected or they're just acting up, and they are basically going to school with parents that don't discipline them properly. So they're allowed to get away with whatever they want to, and then they go to school and they bring that there. And basically what these schools are doing is they're just getting sick and tired of dealing with them. So they have the zero tolerance policy, and they just basically kick them out. And the thing about it is, like you said, man, when you suspend these kids, you're basically taking these kids and that already don't necessarily feel like going to school, and you're saying, you're not worth it anymore, get out of the system. And they said, okay, well, we're going to get out of the system. We're going to stay out of the system. And so that's why a lot of times students that are suspended, they either end up repeating the grade or they end up dropping out altogether because they're being told, you know what, we really don't matter anymore. So why keep trying to fight to be in a system that really doesn't want us anyway?
Yeah, that's right. And all this ends up leading to what? Poverty.
Yeah.
Okay? There's a basic rule out there, and statistically it is proven. If you don't want to be in poverty, you don't want to live your life in poverty, there's three things. Don't get pregnant. Okay, don't be a single parent. Graduate high school and have a job. Okay, so what are those two things? So one of them ties to single motherhood. Right. Okay, and graduating from high school. Those are those two things that we're talking about that the majority of all these students are tied to. Yeah. Statistically, it's not it's just statistics. Yeah. So a lot of these kids, in many ways, they are set up for failure from the beginning. Okay, because they've been raised in an environment and in a home life that supports them going in this direction. Yeah. Okay, simply because there is not a mother and a father there. Now, look, I'm not here ragging single mothers. No, I'm not saying that I'm not putting. I don't want this conversation to turn into something that sounds like we're insulting single mothers.
Not at all.
Okay, I'm simply giving the information that the huge majority of these children that go into these programs end up in poverty. And the huge majority of these children that go into these programs are black. And the huge majority of those black students come from single mothers. Right. So the numbers are there. They don't lie.
Right. And what I wanted to say earlier real quickly was with parents that have two parents in the home, they're either not disciplining their children or they're abusing their children, which sends them to school with issues there as well. But here's another group, okay, that is, in my opinion, getting such a raw deal in this situation is the teachers. Because you see, the teachers are the ones that have to put up with the children that are coming in that are acting up, and they are handcuffed in certain ways as well. But at the same time, they're expected to teach these children, get their grades up, and these children a lot of time are coming in with discipline issues, And so, but they're not allowed to discipline the children like they should. And so because of that, many of these teachers a lot of times are afraid of the students.
Oh, yeah.
Because the students feel like they can get away with certain things. And if they get kicked out, okay, well, then that's just another student that's put out to where the school doesn't care about them anyway. So it's just, I feel horrible for the teachers in all of this. When you talk about the school system, a lot of times I know teachers are a part of that, but they're not necessarily the ones making these decisions, zero tolerance and stuff. They're supposed to enforce what's being put on them by school boards and other educational officials that don't see the classroom every day.
That's exactly right. And I'll tell you something that I learned that I found very disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
A special ed student cannot be expelled under any circumstances.
Now that I did not know.
Okay. That's from one of our elected officials. In the school board. A special ed student cannot be expelled. Now, they may be sent to one of these alternative education schools.
Mm-hmm.
They're not likely to go back to the same school if they are a serious violence problem or they committed terrible infractions. But a special ed student cannot be expelled from school.
Wow.
And I found that to be one of the most disturbing things because if they're special ed, of course, they need the special attention, that they need the special consideration. But when they become aware that there is no way that they can get expelled, and the parents become aware that there is no way that they can be expelled, man, that's a different story.
You know what, and this goes with the special ed conversation too, but what concerns me is when we talk about troubled students and going back to that 88% number, basically 88% of these students being put in these alternative schools are for nonviolent reasons, and they're being deemed as troubled kids, or even kids that respond to being bullied and defend themselves are being termed as troubled kids. You know, you gave that 8-to-1 student-teacher ratio in those schools. I'd be good with that ratio if it had to do with truly troubled kids, because I do think they need more attention. But the fact that we have broadened that umbrella to add students with issues including tardiness, that's not a troubled child. It just needs a little bit more discipline, maybe.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it came to that through several steps. Okay, you got a student and you try to discipline him. You've eaten with the parents. They just won't follow the rules. What are you going to do with them? Well, you send them to one of these schools.
You pass them off.
You pass them off for 45 days, and apparently the concentrated attention that they get in these schools for a short period of time, they have expectations that is going to set them straight. I don't know, but it's not juvie.
No.
But apparently it's not very pleasant either.
But unfortunately, what is being talked about is that many of these places are seen as kind of like holding cells, where it may not be juvie, but it's not seen as a place of further development.
That's right.
Either.
But you've got students in there that may have had a violent history. Okay, they may be in there as real behavioral problems.
Right. Sitting
next to some kid that just can't put his cell phone down. He's addicted to Facebook and he can't get to class on time.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Yep. 232-1542. Got some callers patiently waiting to get in. Caller, you're on Offsides. Go ahead.
Hello?
Hi.
Hello?
Yes,
ahead.
hello.
Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Shannon, I'll tell you a little story about this zero tolerance thing. My son was attacked one day in the hallway at school for no reason whatsoever. Didn't know the guy. He was a special ed student, 18 years old, in the 8th grade. And the assistant principal was standing right there when it happened. He hit my son. My son kicked his butt. They called me. I went down to school. They said he was going to have to be suspended from school for fighting. And I said, you're going to suspend a guy who defended himself? The assistant principal says he got hit. You know, and, oh, yeah, we have to, zero tolerance. I said, well, I have zero tolerance. Let me call the police right now. And they said, what for? I said, I want this boy charged with assault. He's 18. My son's 13.
Cool.
14. I think it was 14.
Wow.
And I said, then I want to call my attorney and sue the school board, everybody involved, from here to wherever, East Afghanistan. And I dig ditches in China to pay the attorneys. I have to.
For exposing your son to an adult.
Well, plus it would go on his permanent record for being suspended for defending himself from school. And I said, nah, that's not going to happen. Anyhow, they had to change a tune, and they used for a little common sense for a change.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, at our club that we have a no fighting rule. You don't go out. We don't teach you how to box. You can go out and beat people up.
No, that's right.
And if we find out somebody's been in a fight, we go find out what happened. And if they started that fight, they're suspended from this club for 60 days. No, I don't care who it is.
Yeah. Well, there's a good difference right there. Okay, and you just gave a perfect illustration of how zero tolerance is used in the proper way and how zero tolerance is used in the improper way. The way that you use zero tolerance in the club is effective, but the way the zero tolerance is applied in the school system isn't necessarily always the right thing to do. And yours is a perfect example. An 18-year-old attacking a 14-year-old. The 14-year-old defends himself, and he ends up receiving the same discipline as the 18-year-old.
Yep. Thank you, sir. That was a great story.
Thank you very much.
And good for you that you're able to fight for your kid. 232-1542, 232-1542. We got to take this break, but when we come back, we'll get more of your calls here on Offsides. Well, news time is 4:28. You're listening to Offsides. Brandon Comeaux, Shannon Wilkerson here on News Talk 96.5 KPEL. And in this 4 o'clock hour, we're talking about a scathing report that says Louisiana's troubled students rarely get help they need through alternative school. But we've also talked about the fact that this umbrella for troubled students has grown so much that it includes 88% of their students being nonviolent offenders. Are they truly troubled? Or are they just being passed along by the school system, by regular schools, into these alternative schools, which are overloading those schools, and those schools are now not performing the way that they're expected to?
Yeah, I think that it's all bogged down with descriptions, written descriptions, and certain protocol. And when this student has this many infractions, this is the next step.
Yeah.
And this type of an infraction and goes to this step. And it doesn't matter what, once they reach that protocol or that level of disciplinary problems, oh man, we got to ship them off to MP Moss.
Yeah.
And see if they'll straighten them up. It's like, wait a minute, the kid's just late for class.
Yeah.
All right. But apparently that's today's school system, man.
Yeah. 232-1542. Caller, you're on Offsides. Go ahead.
Hey, guys. Steve from Youngsville. How you doing today?
Hey, Steve.
Hey.
Good. Listen, I just made it across the Basin Bridge in one piece, and I didn't even slow down.
That's very unusual.
Yeah. Savor those sweet moments in life.
Really.
Well, it was one of those moments. My life is just good right now. So listen, guys, I know I usually kind of do a hit-and-run comment. I'll say something and hang up. You're talking about something close to my heart because I was a public school teacher in an adjacent parish to Lafayette. I'm not going to name the parish, but it was about half and half, black and white. And what was happening to me consistently is you'd have about 2 or 3 kids who would destroy the classroom. Meaning you couldn't teach. They would walk down the aisle slapping kids' heads during the tests. You could have everything. You'd kick them out over and over. It didn't matter. And I was a teacher that would call the homes a lot. And if a kid made 100% on a test, I'd call the home too.
Right.
I mean, and sometimes the students would be, oh, my God, why is he calling? I say, because he did good. But what was happening is I was told that in 2004 they had a thing called mainstreaming, which was done by Bill Clinton, where the kids that usually would have been shunted off to another school were instead put in the classroom because they, quote, had the right to an education. And so they were put in my classroom. And what happened with one fellow in particular was that he was making it where I could not teach at all.
Yeah.
And 32 other kids were losing their education. And at one point, finally, I kicked him out. And the vice principal met me at the door and said, well, you're not kicking him out again. I said, he's not coming back in. And he said, Mr. Steve, he has a right to an education. And I said, not at the expense of 32 other students. He doesn't, sir. And I put my foot down. And the thing that happened was, first of all, they got rid of me. But before they got rid of me, I was told to not tell anybody why I was actually got rid of him. And they said because there are 2 or 3 families in one house, and if you kick him out of school enough times, they lose their Social Security, and they all lose their homes. So what you're doing by kicking this one student out is 3 families are losing their homes.
Okay, right there. Okay, I'm glad you you spelled it all out. Okay, perfect illustration of how our public school system is making decisions that really is none of their business, in my opinion. Okay, they're sacrificing the classroom setting because they don't want this student to lose their housing. Well, this, with all due respect to what their effort is, this student's housing is none of their business. Educating the students is their business.
Well, I don't teach anymore. I was damn good at it, but I won't deal with it anymore. And I was gotten rid of, and a lot of people were sad. They said, this is why we got rid of you, because 3 people lost their housing over you. Because you had students walking down the aisle during a test, slapping everybody in the ear and doing rap songs and stuff and telling me they're going to shoot me in a parking lot. And just saying, I stuck it out, and then they got rid of me, and I said, I ain't going back.
Yeah. Now, Steve, let me ask you this, because one thing in doing research for the show, I was looking at some school districts up in New York that were trying something where they were having in-school suspensions, but what they were doing was they were taking separate classrooms from the main classroom and basically sending students there to spend entire days basically to reflect on the choices that they made, keep up with classwork. And there was a lot of mixed reviews on that from teachers. Some teachers said that they feel like it didn't work because students were just allowed to go in there as a place separate from the actual learning environment. Other reviews said that it actually, because of it decreasing suspensions, actually helped some of the test scores, not in a huge way because it was only a 3-year study at that point, but it talked about the fact that some of these students who were on a bad road, because they were sent to this classroom that was separate from their peers, and I think it was more about the person that was monitoring the classroom than anything, was able to help get them on the right track and help get them thinking positively to be able to be a productive member of society as opposed to just being a troublemaker. So I guess what I'm asking you, Steve, as a former teacher, as someone who was on those front lines, in-school suspension, you kind of addressed it in what you were talking about there, but this is, I think, a little bit different because in this situation, they want to send the student to a separate classroom with a separate area to be dealt with. What do you think about in-school suspension, but being done in that manner where they're getting specialized attention, but not necessarily sent off to an alternative school?
It was a darn good question you asked, number one. Number two, you may not like my answer because it doesn't clear them up very much.
Okay.
50-50. Mm-hmm. First of all, half the time the teacher in school suspension didn't care. It was a coach doing his thing or whatever, or a non-coach. Mm-hmm. But half the time you'd get a good teacher. But half the time the students who were acting out because of exactly what you said, because of peer pressure, they buckled down and did their work. Half the other students were reprobates, and they had no place on the campus, and they should have belonged to somewhere else to try to save their lives. Is where they should have been. But the problem was that in-school suspension didn't work overall because the kids were still there. They were socializing. They were having recess. They were having lunch. They didn't suffer a penalty. And that was the problem, was that it didn't do much on the discipline end because they said, well, great, I get to go in my own little private classroom and hang out with the other guys. It has its place. But I think there should be a very sharp focus on in-school suspension to further weed out the ones who are actually destroying the classroom environment and making it where 33 children are losing their education and their teacher. And I never taught again, and I got great reviews. But
well, I tell you, when I hear about this in-school suspension and Brandon's description and your reply, the first description to me, what came into my mind is that this is just babysitting. That's what it sounds like to me. Now you're just babysitting, and you're just taking the problem student out of the classroom setting. So it does solve the problem that you were experiencing with some of these students. But then they're still on campus, and they're not really paying a price. It was much simpler. When I was growing up, it was really simple. And believe me, I went through a lot of this myself, all right? If you didn't behave, follow the rules, there was this thing called detention.
Yeah.
Okay? The next step was suspension, all right? And there were 2 or 3 different levels of suspension. There was a minimum of 3 days, and it was up to maybe 10 days, depending on the infraction or how many times you had been suspended. Mm-hmm. And then there was expulsion. Yeah. And once you were expelled, man, that was it, okay? You had to either go to a private school or sit out the rest of the year, okay? And that was all there was to it, okay? Now, by law, if you were under a certain age, you had to attend school somewhere, and by law, your parents had to enroll you into a school someplace. And there were public schools that were available for these students that had been expelled, but there was no bus service. Your parents had to bring you there.
Right.
Okay, they had to pick you up. And then if you got expelled from there, that was it.
Yeah.
Okay, you were expelled. You could not enroll in school again until the following school year. Now, that apparently just doesn't exist anymore because you've got situations just like what you described. And we really appreciate you calling in.
Thank you so much, man. We really appreciate that great perspective you had. I want to say this, Shannon. I grew up in a school, a private school, Lafayette Christian Academy, that had a detention system where basically if you got like 14 detentions, you ended up getting, for the year, you ended up getting suspended. And then eventually, if you got a couple more detentions, you ended up getting expelled. But there was a stigma with it. You did not want to get a detention because you knew that if you went into detention, it was an hour after school, and you had to spend that hour working, writing, writing spelling words like 100 times.
Yeah,
it was such busy work that it was a pain in the butt to do.
You couldn't do your homework.
Exactly.
Okay, that's what aggravated me about detention. All right, I spent many a day in detention.
It was true punishment.
Okay, it was real punishment. You couldn't sit there and do your homework.
Yeah.
Okay, because at first, if you do that, it was no big deal.
Right.
Okay, but yeah, it was real punishment. You had to sit there and write out lines. It was called write out definitions. That was the big thing when I was growing up.
Yeah.
You had to write out 350 definitions.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, if you didn't get a certain amount of definitions done by the end of the hour, you coming back tomorrow, Wilkerson.
Another detention.
You got another detention.
Yeah.
Okay, so they would add it on. So you had to get busy on it. The first time you sat down, you might not do it. You might not get after it as much as you should. But then let's say you had 3 suspensions.
Yeah.
You finished the first suspension, you realize you still got 3 more suspensions.
Yeah.
And so it was miserable is what it was.
And I think that's a lot better system than what we have in place today, especially the zero tolerance stuff, where it actually gives the student a chance to say, you know what, if you get up to this certain number of detentions, okay, you've got to have discipline you've got to have discipline that comes your way. You've got to come to summer school or such. But this zero tolerance stuff or just passing students off to the alternative schools when it's situations where it's 88% of them are nonviolent, that bothers me.
Well, you see, the zero tolerance, okay, fine, I would be supportive of the zero tolerance if it followed this type of a protocol.
Right.
Okay, their zero tolerance really isn't zero tolerance. Their zero tolerance is we're going to put you in an alternative education program.
Right.
Man, I'd have been all over that when I was in high school. No problem.
Yeah, and I feel like the system we're talking about, the detention system, it certainly gave the power where it was needed at the school I went to growing up. The teachers definitely had that power, and I think that's what's the problem now is that power has been taken away from teachers so much, and it's been given to the students, unfortunately.
I would never be a teacher.
No.
Okay, I would, they are set up in an environment that is so clearly frustrating in so many levels. They cannot, like he just said, like that teacher just called, Steve.
Yeah, Steve.
When he just called it with that information, when you've got your boss, the vice principal, standing at the door saying, no, you can't throw this kid out of class, and the kid's walking up and down the aisle slapping people in the head. Now, and then you go back to Bo's story. Yeah. Let's say he comes up and slaps you in the head. Then you get up and slap him back. Now that student is up for is subject to suspension because of the zero tolerance.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Sounds like there just needs to be a putback of common sense.
Yeah,
it's just not common sense being taken out.
Yeah.
All right, 232-1542. Caller, you're on Offsides. Go ahead.
Yeah, right around the time when this school suspension started even coming to be was they having all these audits, and they run these school systems like they run the federal prisons. It's a head count. So if those kids are not in school, they don't get those matching funds, and they have to go to school so many days. That's why they're a lot more strict now on tardiness or absentee kids against their parents, because they could literally lose federal dollars. So they don't care about the kids; they just care about head count.
That's a great point.
That's a really good point too, man. You got to keep those numbers. Now we're just talking statistics.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to keep our stats up to keep our money coming in. The money is a whole nother disaster that we'll talk about. We had the the sales tax issue a few months back. Remember?
Oh yeah.
And the money that was supposed to be dedicated to the school board, and the whole financial thing. That's a disaster, too. Yeah. It's all a disaster.
Yeah. 232-1542. Caller, you're on Offsides. Go ahead.
Hey, guys, I got to give y'all a story about detentions and stuff. I think y'all like this. I'm going to try to be fast.
Okay.
Back when I was in school, I went to Notre Dame High School.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And what they gave us, they didn't give us detention. They give us what we call them hours. But basically the same thing as detention. But for hours, what it was you had to work so many hours doing like janitor work and picking up trash and stuff after school. That was what our detention was. Well, but our principal had a deal, too, that you could knock off 3 hours at a time. Now, basically, you had to get it all done by the end of school. You wouldn't get your report card. You wouldn't move on or whatever to the next grade or whatever. Your parents would find out. That was probably the worst thing that you wanted to happen. But anyway, so me and a buddy of mine go in. He's got 20 hours. I had 4. And so we talked to the principal about we're going to work them off. He said, well, he said, y'all can get them knocked off with the paddle. He said, every paddle you get 3 hours knocked off. All right, so we looked at each other and said, "Oh, heck yeah, that sounds like a good deal, man." He's thinking he's got several paddles. I'm thinking I got one, Well, he tells us to wait. So it's right before 3 o'clock, right before school lets out, and the bell rings at 3 o'clock. He says, "Come on, fellas." He brings us out in the front of the school where everybody's out.
Oh, man. Oh, no.
Tells my buddy, lean up on the tree.
Oh,
so he said, heck with it. He leans up on the tree, and look, this paddle was a boat paddle, a small boat paddle, and had holes drilled in it. He whacked him the first time. I said, holy cow. He whacked him the second time. I said, I'll work mine.
Yeah, right.
Oh, no.
I'd have gone back to the hours. I'd have gone back to the hours.
Yeah.
Great story. Thanks for sharing, man.
Thanks, caller. All right, 232-1542.
Good Lord.
Caller, you're on Offsides. Go ahead.
Hey, Brandon. Hey, Shannon. How's it going, man?
Good to hear from you.
Look, I'm calling with a local perspective myself.
Oh, make sure your radio's turned down for us so we can hear you without the echo. Go ahead, caller.
And most of the stuff that y'all talking about as far as like the in-school suspension and discipline within the schools, you can find that as far as like how the discipline is to be handed down for consequences. You should be able to find that on the school system website where it basically outlines this is the consequence, step 1, step 2, and what's to be handed down to them. I would agree with Shannon. I graduated in '94 from Northside High School, so the discipline back in those days was a little bit different. Things have changed now. A lot of the, I would say, a lot of the zero tolerance type stuff that y'all are talking about, and the need to keep the kids in school. I understand the gentleman's previous point as far as dollars from the federal government, things like that. A lot of that stuff plays into it. But you also have a time at one time when you would expel those kids out of school for the remainder of the year. You'd also, in some cases, you'd see a spike in juvenile crime, too. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the processes to, to keep them in school started as a joint effort with the school districts trying to do different things in order to help out the local police as well to curb juvenile crime, too.
Point. It is a good point, and I'm glad you shared it. My response to that would be, the school system has got no business trying to do or assist the police in their job. Okay, I see the big, you're talking about a big machine here. Okay, and how everybody's trying to work together to solve this one big problem. But that has become a completely new problem. This has resulted in a system that's totally out of control. And so when you've got the public school system working with the police department to try to keep kids off the street, that's what the police do. All right, everybody, we'll be right back on Offsides, having a great conversation. Welcome back to Offsides, everybody. Shannon Wilkerson and Brandon Comeaux. We've been talking about the situation with the public school system, with the alternative education programs and schools. And I received a text message from one of the teachers here in Lafayette Parish who says, why put in the effort to students who don't care? Taking time out to discipline takes away from the kids who want to learn. Yeah. They go on to say the students sometimes want to go to in-school suspension because they can miss a test or just sleep all day. So, this in-school suspension apparently isn't so bad.
Well, it's not being
like they're in there.
executed
That's what I'm
properly.
saying. They're just in there hanging around.
Yeah.
Once again, when I was in high school, I'd be all over that.
Well, yeah, it's not being executed well.
Anytime I needed a nap, I'd love to go to in-school suspension. But
you got to make it mean something like what we had when we grew up.
That's right.
We didn't want to go to detention.
That's right. It doesn't seem like it does seem like an answer to some problems, like the previous caller said. You got a student that is disrupting everybody. Okay, if you're not going to suspend them, you're not going to expel them, at least get him the hell out of my class.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can see how some teachers would be supportive of it, at least to that degree. But they had something like that when I was in school before. They just didn't have a title like in-school suspension.
Yeah.
It was called the disciplinarian's office.
Yeah.
Okay, that there was a disciplinarian. Okay, and this person's role was to be mean and scary. All right, I mean that was all there was to it. Yeah. I remember being in junior high school, and when the cafeteria would be like really loud, just during lunch, people cutting up and it would get too loud, and then all of a sudden that disciplinary all they had to do was walk into the room.
Yep.
And the volume would go down. Yep. Okay, because the last place you wanted to be. So it wasn't like this in-school suspension like they have right now. The last thing you're going to do in the disciplinarian's office was go to sleep.
Yeah. They've taken their own fear factor away.
Yeah.
The advantage they had over the students, they've taken that advantage away from themselves. It's unfortunate.
It's role reversal. Now the students are in control.
Yeah. 232-1542. Caller, you're on Offsides. Go ahead.
Gentlemen, I've actually never called you back on the same show. It's not my style. This is Steve. I talked with you earlier about the vice principal who told me I couldn't throw the student out.
Yep.
I just wanted to address, because you guys, first of all, this is why we have your show, because you're bringing up local issues and giving local people a chance to discuss them and solve problems, and that's why you guys get your pay. I hope they pay you really well.
Well, maybe you can make some phone calls on our behalf to address that issue. I wouldn't be opposed at all, but go ahead.
Keep it up. Keep it up.
Thank you.
So here's why I actually have the answer, because, again, best discussion I think I've ever heard so far, but keep it up. Here's the deal. Why do not in-school suspensions work? I'll tell you why. As a teacher, you cannot get them to the next level of detention, and here's why. I had these students that I could not get out of my class. They kept throwing me in school. It didn't matter. The principal, I finally went to him and says, well, I want detention. I want them out of here. I want them after-school detention, take their time away. He said, we can't do that. And I said, why? He said, because we found that when the detention bus gets them home 2 and 3 hours after school is home, when the parents are upset.
There was no bus. We had no bus for detention. You had to find your own way home.
Well, that's what they should do. But here's what I said to the principal. Again, he got rid of me real quick. And other people approached me even years later, say you were the best teacher ever came through our school. We're sorry. And the thing is, I said, why don't you hire a second bus? He said, the bus drivers union doesn't want to have 2 drivers working those hours. So I know I just threw a hand grenade in there. Well, I'm just saying that here is the whole problem. That first of all, I was making less money than the bus drivers as a full-time union teacher. Second of all, the problem was that I said, why do we have all these kids bottled up in school? And why do we not have kids in detention taking their time away? Yep. And they said because they have to ride too far to get home. That was the answer.
That's part of the punishment. Okay, that's part of the punishment. Why? Because they either need to ride their bike a long distance, okay, because now you got detention Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Well, how am I going to get home? That's not my problem.
Yep.
Okay, ride your bike to school, and that way you can ride your bike home. Okay, now they got to ride their bike all the way to school so they can have it at school, and they got to and ride it all the way home. Or take the bus to school like you normally do, and you got to make arrangements for somebody to come pick you up, which means what? Mom and dad are inconvenienced.
Exactly.
Okay, now mom and dad are if mom and dad are not mad at you for being in trouble, they're at least going to be mad at you because they got to come over there and pick you up.
So you got both sides that are upset with you right now,
right?
And they're both taking it very seriously,
right?
And that's too much for the student to have to try to overcome.
Yeah,
and so that's where adults are in charge in that situation.
That's right. And like I was saying, even if you have what would call, thank you, Steve. Even if you have what I would call perhaps an irresponsible parent, who is not upset with the child for the infraction, at least the parent's going to be upset with the child because they got to stop what they're doing to go pick them up.
Exactly. 232-1542. Caller, you're up. Go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
I just wanted to add something. I talk to my daughter all the time about the other students in class being a distraction, and I let her know that when these kids grow up, they're going to regret how they acted in front of their teachers.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to regret the pain that they caused them, because the teachers, I can see it on my daughter's teacher's face, the stress she's under. When we went to open house, I can hear the stress, and they're going to regret how they treated these teachers. It's not right, and they're going to feel remorse for the way they acted.
Well, I'll tell you what you're saying sparks a thought to me that a lot of these students that you're talking about are going to be, as adults, are going to be part of our next conversation in the 5 o'clock hour, which is all about the prison system.
Thank you, caller. Let's see if we can get one more in. Caller, you're on Offsides. Go ahead.
Yes. I'd like to say, great subject. These kids, the parents were not parents. Because, like, for open house, when my husband went to open house, I couldn't make it. The teacher, I had talked to the teacher on the phone, and she said, you're not the parents that we want to show up for open house. She goes, the ones that don't show up is the ones that we want to show up for open house. But going back to, the discipline and all that, those kids don't care, because those kids are the ones that are running the house.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, you're right.
Little Joe and little Betsy are doing nothing wrong. They're innocent. They never do nothing wrong. My kid doesn't do nothing wrong. It's the teacher's fault. That's what you hear all the time.
Yeah. Unfortunately, those teachers get caught right in the middle. Caller, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We've got to go ahead and close the topic down.